Welcome to Trust Yourself, the podcast, the place where we learn that trust is earned and not given, even with ourselves. I'm your host, Betsy. I'm extraordinarily glad that you're here. Stick around. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Trust Yourself, the podcast. I'm very happy to be back with you today. I saw a meme on social media the other day that said, a narcissist's worst nightmare is an educated empath. And what I found through sharing my own story is it has helped me heal, and I've gotten feedback from you all that it's helpful to you to hear these stories. It's empowering to you, and you feel like you're not the only one. What I'll also say is that these podcasts I've been putting out and just the empowerment that has come from it and the education I've received, which I'm sharing with you, has also put a layer of protection around me. It has shown the narcissists that I've acquired in this lifetime that I'm an educated empath. And what happens is when you become an educated empath, or I like to say empowered empath, because education alone doesn't help you. You have to utilize that in your life to become empowered. When you're empowered, the narcissist will move on to an easier target. And your goal is really to get them to move on to an easier target. But being an empath myself, I know that's something really hard for us to digest. We say things like, well, I don't want someone else to suffer through this, so I'm going to prevent that. And that's a way to disempower yourself. When you start to think ahead of time, overanalyze what will happen to other people when you empower yourself, that can really be a mind F, as it were. It can really screw with your head, screw with your emotions, and you go down with the ship. What I say in that bag of tricks, and you can check it out on Instagram and on TikTok, what I share in that bag of tricks is, when I say you want to get them to move on to an easier target, I say don't worry about the other people, the easier targets, because every one of us needs to learn in our own way. And unfortunately, with the topic of narcissism, it's something that you don't learn until you come up against it. So my first tip, before I actually get into my own relationships, romantic relationships that I'll share with you today, my first tip is dealing with one or recovering from one. The best piece of advice is to be extraordinarily discerning and selective of where you seek support and where you try to gain that understanding from other people. I can just say it's unfortunate. It's just an opinion that when you go through great suffering, I find that the thing that I want the most is I want people to understand me. But when you're recovering from or going through a narcissistic relationship, if you talk to the people you would normally talk to, coworkers, friends, family, unless they are educated themselves or unless they've gone through it themselves, you are basically setting yourself up for more gaslighting. And there's basically, gaslighting is gaslighting, but there's sort of two categories of gaslighting. There's gaslighting from narcissists themselves, which is a way to slowly make you question your reality, to etch away at your self-esteem, at your sense of self, and become more reliant on them. There's a whole lot involved, but that's sort of the result. And then there's the gaslighting from the regular everyday world, which is ingrained in our culture and is not so aimed at gaining power and control. It's not aimed to manipulate or hurt people. And this is what you'll get when you maybe talk to your best friend who's never had to deal with a narcissist. One of the things about covert narcissists and narcissists that are not, really out there, right? Narcissists that are not grandiose. narcissists that are highly intelligent is the only time that behavior will be able to be revealed, as in you'll be able to see that they are a narcissist, is usually behind closed doors aimed at one person. So a lot of us have witnessed, experienced, or heard of examples of, let's make it heteronormative for this example, of a wife really trying to come out about the abuse in her past that was from a husband, and everyone in the neighborhood says, oh, but he's amazing, he's so great, he's so generous, he's Mr. Charming. You know, again, that woman must be crazy, or she must be histrionic, or she must be making it up, or she's too dramatic. And that's a form of gaslighting, but it's completely unintentional, and from the friend's behalf who's listening, but also it's a function of the abuser's gaslighting, right? They present one part of themselves to the majority of the world, and then behind closed doors, in this case you, would get the brunt of it. So this is what I mean, that when people have to experience it themselves. This is where narcissistic recovery groups are great. There's so many awesome social media profiles out there of therapists and really group leaders who simply just focus on this. You've heard me talk about Dr. Ramani before on YouTube. She's a great resource. And of course, I'm a huge proponent of therapy. Here's a side note too. When you go to therapy, if you decide to go to therapy, let's say you're in a romantic relationship with a narcissist, if you decide to go to couples therapy with the narcissist, this is a great way to really start off the conversation today. If you go to couples therapy with the narcissist to try to get support, to try to be heard and understood, to try to even out the playing field, or to try to develop a healthier relationship, let's face it, that's why you would be going to couples therapy. If the therapist is not so well versed in narcissism, it will slip right by them. It's not to say that they're a bad therapist. Here's an example. I recently signed up for the free 7-day trial of the channel Stars. I'm not plugging them, it's just what happened. And this example that I'm about to tell you is so worth signing up for that free trial. It's, as I said, it's the Stars Network, and I wound up watching the series Couples Therapy. And in the first season of Couples Therapy, there's Dr. Orna, who is the therapist, and there's a couple, Annie and Mao. And Mao really contributed to my healing this past week. It was the classic example of what my long-term relationship was like. And what's interesting is, I don't know if it's because it was a show, I don't know if it's because in order to diagnose someone as a narcissist, you really need to spend a lot of time with them. If you're, a psychoanalyst or a therapist, to officially, DSM, diagnose them, you need to spend a lot of time with them. But this guy was gaslighting, abusing, etching away at Annie almost the entire therapy session. So if you have the subscription to Stars, great, go ahead and watch it. And if you don't, I would highly recommend it, because especially if you're wondering to yourself. So the long-term relationship, I'm going to basically describe two different relationships. I might go back and forth or intertwine the two. If it's relevant, I'll let you know which one it is. But in that long-term relationship I was in, the word narcissism didn't even come across my mind. It wasn't even in my lexicon, even though I have a BA in psychology and been working with people for, 2 decades or more, 25 years. When I separated from that relationship and narcissism came into my consciousness and I looked online, I would go to 10 ways that your partner is a narcissist, and it wouldn't all click. And I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10, 6 out of 10, depending on what, little article I was on. And so I was like, okay, and, officially there is the personality disorder of narcissistic personality disorder. And then you can have narcissistic like traits, right? Where you're not full-blown narcissist. So I was like, okay, well, maybe they're just sort of like on this scale sort of thing. But it wasn't until I came across the covert passive-aggressive narcissist that it was bing, 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 bing. It's like, okay, so when you yourself are wondering, is my boss, is my neighbor, my family member, whatever, friend, lover, a narcissist, and you sort of go to look it up and you're like, I don't really fit this description. For instance, maybe they don't brag all the time that they're the best of X, Y, and Z. Maybe they do have issues with depression. Maybe they do talk vulnerably about certain things in their lives. Maybe they do express some form of empathy, like intellectual empathy. And so if they're expressing intellectual empathy or you view them as sensitive, you might say, well, this person isn't a narcissist. Here's the thing. I want to make some discernments here. And these are really, really good discernments. So narcissists, especially the more intelligent they are, the more covert they are, they have a really sharp sense of what's called intellectual empathy, which isn't empathy at all. But in casual conversation, it can show up as empathy. And in fact, what I've noticed in my own life and in TV, as in like reality TV, of people supposedly acting real and unscripted drama, things like this, is a narcissist will say, I have empathy. So for instance, I believe Mao said that, I don't really consider things guilty pleasures, but I have been keeping up with the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. And on the more recent episodes of that show, Sutton is being revealed as a narcissist. And you'll see in her conversations, don't worry, that's not a show that I would recommend you to go to watch, unlike the couples therapy. If you're watching it, great. But what she says in her conversations is, I have empathy for you. I empathize. And it's a subtle distinction. All gaslighting is. Rarely do people who actually have empathy say the word empathy or say the word empathize. They say something like, I feel for you, or I feel you. I understand. They might put a hand on your leg, but they don't use the words, I have empathy. Right? So intellectual empathy is what highly intelligent, usually covert narcissists have. And what it means is they understand how empathy works, right? If you look up in the dictionary what empathy is and how it works, they can intellectually understand that. And what they do is they try to use that in an appropriate sense, but it's not exactly like this, but it's like they're a robot or like they're running a computer program. It's very much like that. If you were having a therapy session with AI, for instance, artificial intelligence, and I'm just making this up, but if you were having a therapy session with artificial intelligence, that computer program would be programmed to empathize with you. But it's not real empathy. Real empathy is, I feel the way you feel, and there's mirror neurons in your physical brain and in your body that look like the person who's experiencing the emotion. So if your mother died and you were telling me about it and you were really bereft, if I was feeling empathy, which I'm sure I would because I'm a professional empath, first of all, I wouldn't say I empathize with you or I have empathy with you. That's a little bit robot-like. I would act like you. I mean, I wouldn't cry. Usually one person's crying at a time. but I would look sad. My tone would be so much more sensitive, and I'm not doing a good job of acting right now because I'm in my podcast mode. But you know what it's like. You know what it's like to empathize with someone. And since you, listener, are an empath, you go back in your life and see if you ever, in an emotional moment, a heightened experience emotionally, in an argument, if you ever said, I empathize with you, or proactively told someone that you have empathy for the situation. It's a subtle distinction, but as you're sussing out people, as you're figuring this out, this cognitive dissonance, and what happens is when the narcissists run this intellectual empathy program, as it were, is it does create the cognitive dissonance. So your intuition, your body, your emotions are feeling that they are confrontational, or they are antagonistic, or they're aggressive, or they're passive aggressive, or they're angry when they're saying they're not. And your intuition is right. But you're the one who's suffering emotionally. So when you're suffering emotionally, you're doing your job of feeling your feelings. You're not in an intellectual space usually. And you're feeling your feelings, you're bereft, you're sad, you're happy, whatever it is. And you start to get this feeling that this other person, there's something missing. They're not getting it. But before you can really process that cognitive dissonance, the covert narcissist will say something like, I have empathy, or I am empathetic to, or I understand. You can see how it's different, right? Something that really caught me up, and it was just this tiny sidebar that Dr. Ramadi said in one of her videos. I don't know if it was a recent video or not, but covert narcissists tend to be, quote unquote, sensitive to criticism, or sensitive. And she corrected herself. She said, actually, they're not. Because who's actually sensitive is HSPs, highly sensitive people, otherwise known as empaths. Difference between an empowered empath and a disempowered empath, right? There's two different. An empowered empath sees empathy as a strength, as a gift, as a superpower, which is what I teach people to do. Turn it from a curse into a superpower, into a blessing. An unempowered empath complains about their empathy. They go down with the ship. They don't know how to handle it. They get enmeshed. They're codependent. They get overwhelmed by world events, right? So if you're in that category, I'm your lady. So a covert narcissist, or any narcissist really, is not sensitive. They're overreactive. And the reason why I'm highlighting this is because in that long-term relationship, I had no way of discerning the two. And my partner was so reactive. That's not normal, it's not healthy, and it's not your job to change another person from being reactive. If you find yourself walking on eggshells, if you find yourself just throwing up your hands and doing it yourself because you don't want to deal with the person's reaction to it, and I'm not proud to say, but by the end of that long-term relationship, I was in a typical place with being with a covert narcissist and me being a sensitive, actual highly sensitive person. I wound up doing everything. The cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, the grocery shopping, the running the business, the paying the bills, everything. Because every time I would try to get my partner to do something or talk about it, he would overreact and blow up and throw things. It did even get physical. Not most of the time, just a few times. And again, like, I'm sharing this because, and it is a little bit hard for me to share publicly, but just slightly. I'm more proud for me sharing it than not. But it's not something I'm proud of. I literally had a career as a social worker working with survivors of domestic violence. But here's the thing. Even when I was in that job, there was no education on narcissism, no education on covert abuse, no education on gaslighting. Nothing. So what I did know, though, was I knew about the cycle of violence. I taught that to my clients. And I did know that once it gets physical, usually starting with like the grabbing of the arm, to be honest. You know, you're in a confrontation. This is what happened to me. I was in a confrontation and I would go to leave the situation because it was dangerous, because it was too heated, because it was abusive verbally. And my arm would be grabbed and I would be withheld from leaving the situation. When leaving the situation was actually healthy. It was not running away from conflict. It was, we're not in a healthy place to have healthy conflict. There is such thing as healthy conflict and it's necessary. But I would go to leave and I would be physically held in one place so that I can continue to be barraged. And there's no healthy that can come from that. There's no resolution that can come from that. And also he would throw things. And it's difficult because in those moments I would share from my knowledge base, you know, this is abuse. And dear podcast listener, maybe you don't know that. Throwing things is a form of abuse, even if they're not thrown at you. Being hypersensitive / overreactive to regular healthy conflict or bringing up difficulties or trying to work things out is abuse. Body shaming is abuse. Subtle jabs and hints that all of your friends suck in certain ways, and it's probably not that obvious, it's probably not that overt. That's a form of abuse. It's a form of Rapunzeling you, right? It's a form of quarantining you so that you are not in touch with anyone else. What these abusers do is, over time, they start to become your everything. Your secretary, your fashion consultant, your best friend, your therapist, your whole family. So if you're in that position now, get some help. And I want to address there's something like, takes like 6 to 9 times, something like this, even up to 12. I mean, it really, there's no perfect measure, but the point is that a lot of times it takes a dozen times to actually leave permanently one of these relationships. And it's normal. And I'm going to say it's okay because I'm going to say it's normal. So I don't want you to think that I'm condoning it. But my whole point is, if you've left an abusive relationship, no matter what it is, and gone back several times or a dozen times, the last thing I want you to do is to berate yourself, is to think that you are abnormal, to think that you are weak. In general, nobody wants a person to go back over and over and over again. But that's another reason why I'm making these podcasts, is because the outside world might gaslight you. You know, I remember dating someone and they found out that I was romantically involved with this long-term ex like one time after we separated. And he did say it, this new person I was dating, he said it in a rather compassionate, concerned way. So it wasn't berating me, but it also had an undertone of, what's wrong with you? You must be crazy. And you're like, so wait a minute, you knew he was abusive and you went back to him? So it really does depend on the context and the tone of voice. I felt at the moment, and even now, returning to that conversation, I feel like it was out of truly trying to understand me in the situation. It was this cognitive dissonance for this new guy I was dating. He saw me as intelligent, emotionally smart, capable, and he thought to himself, who am I really dealing with? If she knew it was bad for her, why did she go back? And if you've ever said that to a person, it's just out of a lack of education. It goes back to what I said in the beginning of this podcast of, unless you've experienced it directly, you have no idea. And what I find so fascinating, and you've heard me talk about it on the show before, that when I started to get acquainted with narcissism, this was before I was kicked out of my family, right before, I was prompted by my intuition to watch the Scientology series, and I didn't necessarily know why. Your intuition doesn't tell you why all the time. And it was then that I realized I coined the term the cult of narcissism. Again, it's not apparently other people have coined it, so I'm not taking ownership of it, but I hadn't read it anywhere. And I coined that term because narcissism works the same way as cults. All cult leaders are narcissists. And as Dr. Ramani said, it's the cult of two. Or in case, if you have a matriarch who's a narcissist, the cult of the Smiths or the Joneses or whoever, right? Or could be anyone. But when you're in a romantic relationship, it is a cult of two. And why, let's let that sink in for a moment. With any cult, but it's been repeatedly said with Scientology, and again, I just go back to Scientology because so much information is out there and known, and so it's an easier reference, but all cults pretty much run the same way. If authorities were to go into the cult situation with people who were actively involved in the cult, and they went into the situation and were like, we're setting you all free, those members are so brainwashed that they wouldn't leave. They would say, no, we're fine. Yes, they wouldn't say this to authorities, but they're being beaten up every day, they're being berated, they're being starved, sleep deprived, you name it. Worked like slaves, isolated from their entire families, subject to things that we would never want to be subjected to. And they would refuse to leave. It's a form of brainwashing. So it's the same thing as to why it can take 12 times of you going back and going back. It's because if that's what you've been living with for so long, if you have been isolated, then you have been indoctrinated into that cult of two. And if you are uneducated on the cult of narcissism, if you're an unempowered empath, and that's not to blame you in any way, these are just the factors that contribute to that, the leader of the cult of two, the narcissist, knows exactly what to do to get you back. And it's not a pretty cycle. And it's not going to make sense to the outsider. So whether this is happening to you or someone you know, it's about having compassion. And one time, after I left that long-term relationship for good, I had a friend of mine call me up and say that she knew another friend of hers that was trying to leave. And I think she was on her fourth time going back to the abusive relationship. And my friend said to me, what advice do you have? Because I want to get her out of this, but I also know that it's typical for the person to continue to go back, 9 to 12 times. Is there any way I, as a friend, can help her? And in terms of, is there any way that you can help someone? The answer is yes and no. I think the majority of people are on the side of the fence that if they say, well, you know, your husband's a loser, or he's a narcissist, or he's an abuser, you should never go back to him, he's bad for you, you're probably afraid that you're going to be losing your friend, that she's going to fall out of touch with you. And unfortunately, that is the case a lot of times. So that's not necessarily an option. I have a lot to say about that, but that's for another episode, a way to prevent that. But what I said to my friend is, be there for her. Don't lose hope on her. Not continually, like not all the time, but, you know, don't lose touch with her. Ping her. You know, every month or every 3 months, ping her. And even if it's been 2 years since you've heard from her, if you know she's still in that abusive relationship, just constantly let her know that you're there for her. And it's the same thing for people who are living inside cults. If you have someone who's in a cult, that's what you can do, is you can just continually show and share that you do love them and that you will always, 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 always be there for them. If you break it down, it makes sense that if you as the friend throw up your hands and give up on your friendship because this friend has gone back for the 12th time and you just can't take it anymore. Well, you do you, boo. Like, if you have to take care of you and that's what you need to do, that's completely fine. I will always advocate for you taking care of you first. But if you have the strength, just like a loving family member, just like a mother or father who says, I love you unconditionally, I will always be there for you, no matter what. Then when and if that person wakes up from the cult or the cult of two, whatever it is, when they've Rapunzeled themselves or gotten themselves Rapunzeled so that they have nowhere to go and no one to talk to, hopefully they've kept your phone number and address and they can show up at your door. And they may or may not go back. So there's that. You can definitely encourage them to go to therapy, again, with a therapist who understands narcissism. And you can get them domestic violence hotlines, suicide prevention hotlines, give them to them. You can help encourage them to have like a to-go bag with names and phone numbers of people, you know, in their car or something hidden from their abuser. You can do those type of things with no expectation that they will or won't use it. So a lot of times what will happen is that person will go back and you'll lose touch with them again because, again, they've been Rapunzeled by their abuser. So in the beginning of my long-term relationship, I really fell into so many typical traps of a narcissist. I wouldn't say that I was an unempowered empath, but I had this massive realization the other night as I was going to sleep. It was like there was something in my past that I didn't completely understand myself, and I was kind of blaming myself for, and then I saw it in a whole new light. So let me break this down for you. So we were dating for, I don't know, like 9 months or something like this, and we moved in together. And there was a point, I believe, within the first week of us living together where he was being so incredibly critical of me and body shaming me. And I remember crying and saying over and over again, like, I do better with compliments and encouragement and cheerleading rather than constant criticism. And we just weren't getting anywhere. I didn't feel like the sex was connected in my heart. I was complaining about that. And the body shaming and my outfit shaming was really intense. And like I said, it was like within the first week of us moving in together, I did have massive doubts, and those doubts were really coming from my intuition, I can honestly say. So I'm not embarrassed that I ignored or disregarded my intuition. It did lead me down a horrible, horrible path. But here's the new realization that I had. Going back into that situation, okay, so we moved in together. It was in a tiny one bedroom. He was living in a one bedroom. I was living in a one bedroom. And his stuff was nicer than mine. And so I got rid of all my stuff. And I actually wasn't able to get that apartment because I had the apartment first, and then he moved in. I wasn't actually able to get that apartment without his help. So he was on the lease. It was like a co-lease. It was the two of us on the lease. I didn't have enough financial security. I had consistent income, but I didn't have enough financial security to find another place to live. I couldn't be on two leases. My numbers wouldn't show that. And I also intuitively knew at that time that I couldn't rely on my family. And this was back in 2012. And the reason why this is such a profound realization for me now in 2022 is because I was right. It was 2021. It's actually July 10th, 2021, and today's July 8th, 2022. So July 10th, 2021, after 9 months of giving up my work and taking care of my aging parents, that they kicked me out of my family permanently and told me never to come back, and I haven't heard from them since. Anyone in my biological family and friends of the family. Basically, period, end of story. And also, when I left that long-term relationship 6 years later, I did run to my family, like one does. And when I announced that we were breaking up officially, my mother said, well, that's nice. We're going to get rid of you and adopt him. And even though it was the beginning of our relationship, when I had these doubts, I also had an intuitive feeling that my family would not be the typical family that you would want that would be that respite. Like I described, you can be for your friends. No matter what, I will always love you. I will always be there for you. Obviously, that's not the family I was dealing with. I couldn't put a finger on it. I didn't know what was going on, but I intuitively knew that I could not be safe there, that I would not be sheltered there, that I would not be held until I could get back on my feet. And, 10 years later, we found out that that's the truth. So I wasn't really ever berating myself that after the first week of moving in with this long-term partner that I, quote unquote, ignored my intuition, which was like, hey, maybe this is not so healthy. Maybe you should get out of this. I never really berated myself, but I also wasn't proud as someone who's also been teaching even before then, now for 15 years, how to trust your intuition. That was more of a curiosity point for me rather than a shameful point. And now that I look at it through this lens, I realize that I didn't have anywhere else to go. I didn't have furniture. I couldn't sign a lease. I didn't have enough financial independence. I didn't have a supportive family. And I didn't have any friends or extended family who could take me in either. And 10 years later, it was still the same thing in 2021. When I met this partner, I fell into some of the traps, as I said. One of the things that a narcissist does, there's something called the narcissist stare, which when I first came across it, I didn't understand it. Because when I heard the word stare, my interpretation of stare was something that makes me uncomfortable. You think of like you're out in public and some weirdo is staring at you, or you feel like someone's staring at you, even, staring at your back, and you turn around and there's like some creepo that like looks away immediately. That's kind of the staring. Or, as a kid, you get taught not to stare, right? That's the stare that I was thinking of. But no, I really do know what this narcissist stare is. And if you happen to be an unempowered empath, if you happen to be of a similar family background to me, or you were raised by a narcissist, or you come from an abusive household, or even if you don't consider yourself coming from an abusive household, but you really feel like there's a lack of someone intimately seeing you, knowing you, hearing you, understanding you. And I'm not talking about sexually. I'm saying like you really feel like someone gets you. You have that need fulfilled where you're like, you know what? My people see me. They know who I am. If you don't have that, then you are waiting to be a target for this narcissistic stare. And I remember describing this stare to my family, to my friends, like, what was the relationship like? And I was like, oh my gosh, it's so amazing. Like, I can remember being at coffee with my friends, telling them about it. Like, he's so amazing. Like, when he is with me, he is so present. He looks at me and only me, because I've been cheated on so many times in my relationships. He only looks at me, and it's like the rest of the room disappears. That's the narcissist stare. To me, it made me feel special, but it is sort of a saccharine or oversaturated. It's actually extraordinarily unhealthy. And what's happening for you is not the same thing that's happening for the narcissist. If you're in the position that I was in, it can make you feel like you're really special, like they're focusing all their attention on you. It's like the thing that you've always wanted. But what's happening on their end, unfortunately, and I'm glad to educate you now, is they're literally studying you. They are like a machine. I don't feel like they are machines, by the way. I'm making these references to robots and machines and computer programs. I don't feel like they are, but they don't feel things the way we feel things. And so they literally are more calculated. But they're actors. They make it look like they feel things. So a lot of times when you first encounter a narcissist, they will ask you so many questions about yourself, and you'll be like, oh my gosh, he's the best listener ever. He remembers things, or she, could be anyone. They remember things. Oh my gosh, you're asking me about myself. We have so much in common. They're just like me. And everything else disappears when we're together. There's a laser point focus on you. That's unhealthy. That's actually a portend of, that's projecting into the future of what's going to happen later, is that they will try to be your everything. They will try to make everything else disappear around you so that you're under their mind control. I'm picturing like someone hypnotizing someone with those swirly eyes, right? It's like, woo, I will do what you want. It's not as dramatic as that, but the results are the same. So I remember describing the narcissist stare. And when I left that relationship, I remember my mother, I'm laughing because I was going to say, I remember her asking me how I got into that relationship and why I stayed. But it was not a conversation. It was her screaming at me, literally. We're in the kitchen, and she got extraordinarily angry and extraordinarily upset, which is not normal, by the way. But this is like what I was used to. And she's like, how could you get yourself into something like that? Da, 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 wah, bah, bah. And I said, I stopped her, and I did raise my voice just to protect myself, to set a boundary so I wasn't emotionally irritated and heightened the way she was. It was like when you tell someone who's about to physically hurt you, a random stranger, stop, no, It's like that, right? It was like assertive instead of aggressive. I got assertive and I got loud, and I said, because I never stopped him from treating me the way that you're treating me now. And I said, you'll never treat me that way again. Now, I didn't enforce that boundary. When I went back during the pandemic, that was sort of a regular MO. And that is truly the case of how I got in, why I stayed, why it was familiar, why it felt like love to me. And in addition to that, it's part of the gaslighting. It's part of the way narcissism works. It's a part of the way that narcissistic family units work. I was used to being constantly criticized by my brother and sister. And the way I saw it, which is not the correct way and it's not the healthy way, is that I was always a little sister, and so it was always like, hop to it. You know, you're not doing it right. You got to do it this way. You got to do it that way. And I was programmed, quite honestly, to see it as helpful, right? To always want to improve, to want to be seen, to want to do well, to not be yelled at, right? I was used to the constant criticism. And that's, you know, when I talk about the 10 reasons that I attracted a veritable Congo line of abusers, it's a social media post I made. One of the things I say is because I'm an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurs are more likely to stay longer in narcissistic relationships because as entrepreneurs, we are used to taking full responsibility for our lives and tenaciously working until it works. And when you're an entrepreneur, there's no one to blame for your failure, for something going wrong. It's always on your shoulders. And so the sort of inherent trait that someone must have or develop to be an entrepreneur is that unquenchable thirst to always be doing better. Now, that's great in business, and it's great in healthy relationships. But when you're being gaslit and you're being constantly criticized and you blindly trust the person and you don't know that they don't have your best interest in mind, that's where it can go wrong. And so that's why I'm going over in this podcast certain things that you might not know, the things that I did not know as a social worker for 10 years, working with survivors of domestic violence, as someone who has a BA in psychology and working directly with people one-on-one in groups for, at that time, 25 years, and now it's been longer. It's closer to 30 years. It's like the more you know. The narcissist's worst nightmare is an educated, and I'll put in empowered, empath. So they'll just move on to someone else that's an easier target. Something that I learned after leaving that long-term abusive relationship, well, first of all, I learned that my mother and this partner were covert narcissists, which covert means hidden, which means most people don't know. Most people think they're the cat's meow. You know, they're an entrepreneur, or they're a community activist, or they're a church leader, or they're a social worker, right? They don't have to be someone prominent, but maybe they give to charity all the time, or maybe they're just super nice to everyone all the time, or charismatic. But then behind closed doors is where you, and possibly only you, see it, get the brunt of it, have the abuse. So when I left that relationship and worked on my healing and learned about narcissism, and after I was kicked out of my family, I realized that narcissists, all narcissists, they can't take ownership of any mistakes, anything that's gone wrong in the past. It's always everyone else's fault. And covert narcissists specifically are always victims. So that's a lot of ways that they get you, if you're an unempowered empath, an uneducated empath, is they will get you to empathize with them authentically. As Julian said on a previous interview podcast, with the Astrology of Narcissism podcast, she said, the narcissist will say, right when I was about to peak at my success, somebody came in and sabotaged it, and I'm a victim, woe is me, or had to sue someone, or they stole all my music, or whatever it may be. And so when they tell you that major story, you're empathizing with them. You're on that roller coaster, building up to a music career, doing so good, gave them all my music, all my sounds, and then, bam, I was left in the dark. Or they took credit for all my work, or whatever it may be, and you're like, oh my gosh, that sucks. And you yourself know what it's like to be victimized, and you're just like, oh, and you empathize with them. That creates a trauma bond, and you're bonded to them, and you trust them more. That's all very calculated on their behalf. So I realize that they can't take ownership of past mistakes. So you and I, healthy individuals, we could sit down right now and I could say to you, like, tell me about something in the past where you were wrong and you realized you were wrong and you changed. I could tell you hundreds of examples of that in my own life. I've shared them on the show, sharing them right now. A narcissist, pay attention if you actually ever ask them this question. If you ask them, be like, oh, tell me about a time where you've grown in the past, where a conflict happened and you realized that you were the one in the wrong and you changed. They will probably answer a question like that. They will give you some kind of word salad, or they will answer it in a way that sort of spins you around 3 times and spits you out with the feeling that you were expecting to have. But when you leave the interaction and you actually review what they told you, they didn't take any ownership at all. That's almost like the definition of a relationship with them. And that's why with their tactics and cult tactics, they want to be your everything because they don't want to give you a chance to think about things. It was literally with only the past 2 months that I realized that one of the tactics that long-term relationship had, that guy had on me, was sleep depriving me. I had no idea. I had no idea that that's what he was doing, but he would repeatedly refuse to hang out with me before 10 or 11 at night, and then we'd watch a movie and he would nudge me awake. And that's the thing I can't stand the most is trying to stay awake through a movie. It's just very painful for me. It's something that I really don't like. But I would do it because it would be the only time we could hang out together. And he knew I was an early riser. And yet, even after we lived together, this was the only time we could hang out. And I wanted to hang out with my partner. Well, what that equated in was literally sleep depriving me. So therefore, I couldn't think straight. That's what cults do. So I realized that they can't take ownership of things. And so I decided, I had this little pact with myself, and I encourage you to take this too. Everyone will have new relationships at some point in their life, is to, when I meet someone new, to listen for them to say something like that organically in a conversation, and or if it's a first date or second date and I don't hear a story like that, of a place where they've improved in their lives and took ownership and changed. And I would ask them as a litmus test to see if they were a narcissist. Let me go back to word salad, because that's a term. So word salad is when you ask someone a question, a narcissist a question, and what they're saying is so convoluted, usually long-winded, sometimes not even complete sentences, goes from here, there to everywhere, and it's that equivalent of spinning you around 3 times and spitting you out to the point where you're just like, let's just get this conversation over with because it's exhausting. That's the point. They're confusing you so much with so much different chopped vegetables from here, there, and everywhere, the salad, concepts from here and there, or they over-intellectualize something or bring up emotions out of nowhere, or you ask them about them and they bring it around on you. All these different ways they have these conversations that when you leave the conversation, you realize either you don't understand what they were saying or you walk away taking the blame every single time. That's word salad. So I also didn't know, and this is something that I have not seen in any of the resources out there about narcissists. So this is something that I'm very happy to share with you, is that highly intellectual narcissists, usually covert narcissists, generally will preemptively either tell you what you want to hear or distract you from what you were originally looking for. So let me give an example. So with the short-term relationship, it had been a really long time since I had dated anyone. I mean, I think I calculated it was close to 3 years that I had dated anyone. And I come across this person, bright bulbs burn fast. Be careful of that with narcissists. They're going to want to see you right away, constantly. They're going to pressure you to move forward, but in a subtle, covert way that makes it feel like you're making the decision, that they're not pressuring you. So I met this person, and since it had been so long, I had forgotten about this pact I had with myself to see if they would take responsibility for anything, which I won't forget now. And here's the thing that I haven't heard anywhere else. They'll proactively tell you what you want to hear. So just like we said, they have like the intellectual empathy. If you want to know that they're not a narcissist and you want to know that they have empathy, they might just proactively tell you that they're an empath. And you'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm an empath too. And all of a sudden you feel like they're like you. Whatever it is, they could do that. Now, this person, I found it really fascinating. Within our first date, he started talking about narcissists. And he said to me that he knew that narcissists typically talked about themselves. Now, what's interesting is he actually had it wrong. Covert narcissists they're not grandiose. They don't always talk about themselves. Covert narcissists will ask you about you so they can gather information and either directly use it against you, as in like blackmail or turn it around on you or threaten you with it, or to mimic you and bond with you and make you think that they're exactly like you. So he literally said on the first date, narcissists don't ask questions about other people. And so this is how sneaky it is. It's so messed up. And it's so, dare I say, it's so good. And what I mean by good is he freaking got me. It's really, really terrible. It's not good, but like he was really good at what he did. He was like, I didn't bring up narcissism. I was not talking about narcissism. It wasn't on my mind. In fact, I had forgot to vet him to see if he was a narcissist or not. I was carried away by the whole thing, which is partially, I have to take responsibility for that, but also that's his MO as well. So he's like, narcissists don't ask questions. So he's saying about how he vets people to see if they're narcissists or not. And he says, so if I'm talking to someone and I wind up asking all the questions and they don't ask any questions about me, then I know they're a narcissist. Now, this is why I say narcissists are getting educated themselves. This is a little bit scary, but it's just reality. I actually met a neighbor the other day, and she's getting divorced after like 23 years or something from her narcissist husband. And they were having an argument, and he said something that was like the lingo of, narcissistic education. And she called him out. She was like, "Oh, so you've been doing your research, huh? You've been watching the narc videos." And he was taken aback by that. And so she kind of turned it around and was like, "Well, if you're calling me a narcissist," which I don't know if she is or she's not, I was getting no, but she was focusing a lot on herself for healing and protection. And she's also experiencing trauma and was very dramatic. But a lot of times it's what happens in the middle of a divorce, especially something like this. She said, "Okay, well, if I'm the narcissist, then we should go no contact," which is gray locking, depending on who you ask. And he did not like that, because narcissists don't want you to shut them out, because then you stop their supply. Now, that also proves that she was not a narcissist, because she just wants him out, period, end of story. She was just turning it around on him. You can see how that's very covert. It is rather scary, but if you're educated and you take that education to empower yourself, and you get help, you get support, you keep listening to this and other resources, you'll be able to spot it. You're going to need to have space and time to reflect, and you're going to need to use that time to reflect. So you are responsible for creating the time. When you have that time and space, then you're responsible for reflecting. So what that means is, let's say, again, this could be family member, boss, coworker, neighbor, romantic relationship. It doesn't matter. Let's keep it to the romantic relationship. It's easier to talk about, but it's the same thing with a friend, neighbor, boss, whatever, cult leader. That narcissist is going to want to see you or have you do something for them right away. When can I see you again? They're going to text you the next day, or maybe even that day. And if you're swept off your feet, I'm going to say it's your fault, but if you're not educated, there's no way you could know. So you don't need to beat yourself up. It just means that you can prevent it in the future, right? It's like getting in a car behind the wheel and driving without taking driving lessons. It's your fault that you got into an accident, but you didn't know any better because you weren't educated. And maybe there was a reason why you had to get behind the wheel. Maybe you didn't have any resources for yourself to get that education. I can empathize, truly. I get it. I've been there, even with a social work and psychology background. That's why these resources exist. So you don't need to beat yourself up, but what you need to do is you need to say, "No, I'm busy. I need time to reflect." And you're going to need to spend time with yourself reflecting on your time with this person. Is there any cognitive dissonance? Cognitive dissonance is feeling one thing, but intellectually knowing another thing. So classic form of cognitive dissonance, towards the end of that short-term relationship, I knew exactly what I was dealing with. I didn't know how bad he was going to get, but he wound up just following the narcissistic by-the-book script, so it was easy to tell. But, an example of cognitive dissonance, which is very typical of narcissists, is you can tell that they're seething, that they're so mad, yet they have a smile on their face. And they say, "No, I'm not mad. I'm fine. I'm good. No, I'm happy with my life. I do not have low self-esteem. I have high regard. I'm in a good place." Can't see my face, but Amber Heard does that repeatedly. That guy Mao on couples therapy does that repeatedly. And, I do not recommend calling a narcissist out. That will only backfire on you and get you further down that weird rabbit hole spiral of more manipulation. I didn't call him out for being a narcissist, but I said to him, I can sense that you're angry right now, which I don't necessarily recommend that you do with a narcissist. With a healthy relationship, absolutely. Like, oh, let's take some time, or let's process that, or whatever. But with a narcissist, if you say, I sense you're angry, they're going to fight back with fire 5 times more. And so I did that. I was like, oh, I can sense that you're angry or upset by this. And he was like, no, and it was funny because he was like almost yelling with a smile on his face saying, no, I'm fine. And again, I wouldn't recommend this, but in email, I was like, well, for somebody who says they're fine and is like massively obsessed with me and, hounding me for $45 when my account is in the negative and saying you're going to sue me and, combing through all of my psychic medium reviews from years ago, your actions kind of say something else. If you were truly fine, you would not be hounding someone who is borderline homeless. Again, I'm laughing now because I do think that that's actually funny in hindsight. I mean, it's actually horrific. It was terrible abuse, terrible covert abuse. No one should be treated that way. And I do not recommend you engage with any narcissist in this way. But it's true. And that's something that when you find yourself in that position, that's where you can't go to your best friend who hasn't experienced it. You can't go to your coworker or whatever who doesn't understand it. You can't go on Facebook and rant because you're literally going to be seen as the crazy person, which is a function of their gaslighting and abuse. But you can go to narcissistic recovery support groups. They're all over online. You can read books. Psychopath No More or Psychopath Free is an amazing resource. The book, The Passive Aggressive Covert Narcissist, I highly recommend. And a therapist who is well-versed in narcissistic recovery from narcissistic abuse. I do not recommend you go to couples therapy. If you are in a romantic relationship with a narcissist and you want to go to couples therapy, I invite you to watch that first season of Couples Therapy on Stars. So in that long-term relationship that I was in, it was a slow etching away. And, my symptoms are by the book of what happens after long-term covert abuse. Literally, before I met this person, I did not own a single piece of black clothing. No black underwear, no black bra, no socks, no coat, no hat that was black, not even a headband that was black. I had all this brightly colored, bright pattern clothes, and by the time we were over, my wardrobe was full of black and, navy blue baggy clothes. So that was a result of long-term Rapunzeling abuse, covert gaslighting that I was unaware of, and I was in that position because that was how I was treated my life. Like my whole life, my whole family treated me with contempt. That's something else I wanted to bring to you. If you listen to the How Amber Heard Healed Me episode of this podcast, you'll understand too. Contempt is the baseline for narcissists, and it comes out in different ways. In the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, they do this little montage of the look that Sutton gives. She gives this like I think she thinks it's like mischievous or whatever, like I got you face. Like she's probably not even aware of the face that she's making, but contempt comes out as a facial expression for different people in different ways. Sometimes there could be a little mischievous smile, but usually there's like the furrowed brow and looking out from underneath it. Again, the behavioral panel, like I mentioned in that episode, is a great resource to recognize. They're a group on YouTube. You can watch their videos to understand micro expressions, to understand if someone's lying, and to get acquainted with, if you're anything like in my shoes, what's not normal and what's not okay, and what is healthy and what to look out for. One sort of last thing I'll say as a tip that I intuitively knew somehow, but most people miss this, is you never want to call a narcissist. But they will typically call you a narcissist. They'll try to get you to think that you're a narcissist as part of the gaslighting and all of that. You never want to call them out as a narcissist. It will always backfire. If you want to know why, YouTube it, check out what Dr. Ramani has to say about it and all the other experts. It will just really, really, really blow up in your face. Luckily, I don't have to deal with too much narcissism anymore. They are everywhere. If you look on my social media, you'll see how I really won, honestly, with one in the laundromat, which is very, very rare. And you have to be really empowered and connected to your intuition to let that happen. It's possible. They're literally everywhere. You'll bump into them at the grocery store, wherever you are, it doesn't matter. So they're in the workplace, so you can't avoid them. The ones that you've had in your past will, statistically they say, will never leave, which means that you can be no contact for years, and then every once in a while they'll ping you. And as I've said in previous podcasts and broadcasts and social media, that they're trying to get more what they call narcissistic supply. They get off on making you upset, and it makes them feel better. But if instead you see that random pinging as, oh, they're trying to take me down, which means that I must be up high, so therefore I'm going to take this as a good sign, and instead of allowing it to tear me down and to think of all the past abuse, I'm going to think about how much healed I am and be like, wow, this is really cool. They wouldn't be trying to take me down unless I was high up, so thanks for that reminder. If you wind up using it as an alley-oop from the universe instead of allowing the narcissist to take you down, those pings will be non-existent. That's what it means to be an educated empath and that you're their worst nightmare. They're not going to come after you if their pings don't work, but 99% of the time with 99% of the people it works, and they do it in sneaky ways. They might just like a photo, they might send you an email that says happy birthday, they might try to sue you out of nowhere, all sorts of things. If you're co-parenting with someone, it's sneaky, it's subtle. Maybe they make a whole new social media account and try to take you down that way. Like, there's all sorts of ways that they will do that. But, in my personal and professional life, when I have trolls, my whole team celebrates. We get happy. And we honestly have compassion for the troll or the narcissist. Because the narcissist and trolls, they have a soul, but they will never be in touch with it. They will never be in touch. An empath, we're very much in touch. The only way that we're not is if we're completely disempowered and we're enmeshed with other people. And so it's like misery loves company. That's what they're depending on. So it's interesting because the woman, I don't even remember her name. She's a new woman on the Beverly Hills Housewives. She's calling Sutton out as a narcissist, and she's like, she's always trying to take me down to her level, and I don't want to go there. She literally calls her out for having a lack of empathy, and what's Sutton's response? I have empathy. But you'll see how it comes out, and you'll see how bad it gets. And when you start to become empowered in the midst of a narcissistic relationship, you'll see how quickly they unwind and how they literally show their true colors of being the one who's unhinged. When you are able to stay hinged in the face of this crazy making gaslighting, and you're sticking to yourself and to your soul and to your healing, they're the ones who wind up unraveling, and that's why you become their worst nightmare. So cheers to you becoming the narcissist's worst nightmare. And if you haven't encountered this yourself, you will be. And I don't mean that as in you're going to date someone or you're going to have a family member, but it's rampant around the world. A lot of our leaders, corporate leaders, elected leaders, are well known to be narcissists and gaslighting. And so I'm not cursing you, I'm not predicting, I'm not guaranteeing. It's just that they are everywhere. And the more that you can get educated now, the more that you can avoid it. And also, even if you don't ever encounter this in your personal life, countless people in your life will, and now you know how to support them. You can also support them by sending them this podcast. Quite literally, what I did in this podcast is give you all of the things that I was unaware of that kept me trapped. Some of them you won't find anywhere else. And all of the rest, I had to do countless hours of research to find out myself. So I am very, very happy to be able to get this out to you. Next week, we're going to have another amazing interview. And in the following weeks, when it's just me solo, I'm going to be talking about some gaslighting in the medical industry, some triumphs in the medical industry that followed up, that was previous gaslighting and then a triumph. Some really interesting things about me trusting myself and trusting my body, despite what the medical community says. And it's something that needs to happen as a revolution in the healthcare industry. It's starting to happen, as it is with other places. So with our own bodies, we need to trust our bodies instead of trusting doctors. And doctors need to trust us too. But if we don't trust ourselves, they can't trust, right? It's not exactly the same, but it's a wonderful parallel. One of my neighbors, who I love, she is a social worker, and she is literally employed to accompany sheriffs on their emergency calls. Sometimes she'll even go ahead. That's one of the things that we as a society are enacting that need to happen for positive change to happen, right? So that, for instance, police won't come with guns drawn to someone who's having a schizophrenic break and kill them. If you sent a social worker or a mental health care worker ahead of time, they would know the ways to de-escalate that person and evaluate whether they were a threat, evaluate whether they were violent, or if they were just having a break. So that is to give you hope. And the stories that I will share about my own history, about bridging the gap between straight up intellectual medical establishments that are disconnected from the soul, disconnected from the body, disconnected from intuition, and being that bridge so that we can work together. I always say I am into spirituality, and I also rely on Western medicine. It's completely true. I wouldn't be alive today if it weren't for that. So I don't demonize either, and I don't shun either. We need to have a way for them to blend and work together, and that's going to happen with us. We have to learn it. We have to command it. We have to demand it. We have to enact it. It's up to us. So you can look out for future episodes like that. In the meantime, if you would like to learn how to trust your intuition without second guessing in the face of fear, doubt, and uncertainty, you can always head over to my website for that free masterclass. It would be an honor to be able to share that information with you. Really good stuff there. And until next time, may your intuition be with you. This episode of Trust Yourself, the podcast, is created, written, and produced by me, your host, Betsy LaFay. Music provided by the amazing and generous Ben Talmi. Thanks, Ben. If you'd like to find out more about me and my work, and specifically how you can trust your intuition, head over to betsylafay.com. Thanks again for being here. See you next time. Oh yeah, and if you like the show, please subscribe and give us a review. It's one of the best ways to help us get the word out to other people like you. Of course, if you know anyone else that would find this podcast helpful, pass it along to them. Sharing is caring.